Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Summer 2012. The temperature is pushing 52 degrees Celsius. That's 126 Fahrenheit for the Americans. Reading this, hot enough to cook eggs on vehicle armor. Hot enough to melt the soles of boots. Hot enough to kill you if you're not careful. A joint patrol is forming up at Forward Operating Base, Edinburgh. Mixed unit, British Royal Marines from 42 Commando and American soldiers from the 101st Airborne. Standard coalition operation. Clear a village, suspected of Taliban activity. Establish presence. Win hearts and minds. The usual, the British Marines are loading up. They're moving light. Rifles with optics. Body armor with front and back plates only. Helmets. Basic ammunition load. Water. Radio. First aid kit. That's it. The American platoon sergeant watches him and feels something between confusion and concern. He approaches the British sergeant. "Where's the rest of your kit?" The British sergeant looks at him blankly. "This is our kit." The American gestures at his own soldiers. They're carrying nearly double the equipment. Extra ammunition, side plates, backup radios, spare batteries, mortar rounds distributed across the squad, AT for rockets, additional water, MREs, contingency supplies for every possible scenario. The American sergeant weighs about 210 pounds. His equipment weighs another 140. He's carrying 65% of his own body weight. His soldiers are carrying similar loads. The British sergeant weighs about 180 pounds. His equipment weighs 75. He's carrying 42% of his body weight. The American does quick math. "You're missing about 60 pounds of gear." The British sergeant shrugs. "Don't need it." The American opens his mouth to argue, but the British patrol commander is already moving. "Let's go, gentlemen. We've got ground to cover." What happens over the next 9 hours will become one of the most discussed examples in military load carrying. Debates. A patrol had exposed fundamental differences between American and British approaches to infantry operations. A patrol that left American soldiers physically destroyed, while British Marines remained combat effective. A patrol that sparked genuine institutional reflection about whether the American way of equipping soldiers was sustainable. But here's what nobody talks about. The humiliation wasn't just physical, it was doctrinal. The Americans weren't beaten by fitness or toughness. They were beaten by a philosophy, a completely different way of thinking about what soldiers need and what soldiers can survive without. Stick with me, because this breakdown reveals something crucial about how militaries think, why they disagree, and what happens when those disagreements meet reality in the worst possible conditions. Let me give you the context, because without understanding the background, you'll miss why this patrol mattered so much. The American military has a weight problem, not the soldiers. The equipment. Since World War II, the load carried by the average American infantryman has increased by over 100%. In 1944, a soldier landing at Normandy carried roughly 80 pounds, already considered excessive by the standards of the time. In 2012, a soldier in Helmand carried 140 to 160 pounds as standard. Some carried more. Radio operators, machine gunners, mortar crews. There are documented cases of American soldiers in Afghanistan carrying over 200 pounds. 200 pounds. That's not a soldier. That's a pack mule in body armor. How did this happen? Technologist. Every piece of new equipment weighs something. Better body armor covers more area. Front plate, back plate, side plates, groin protection, shoulder protection. Each addition saves lives. Each addition adds weight. Night vision saves lives. Adds weight, more sophisticated radios, better coordination, more weight, batteries for the radios. More batteries, because the radios drain power faster, with more features. 20 pounds of batteries alone. Ammunition. More is always better. What if the firefight lasts longer than expected? What if resupply is delayed? What if you need to hold a position overnight? Carry more rounds, more grenades, more rockets, more weight. Water can't function without it. 3 liters minimum. 6 liters if you're being cautious. 8 liters if the mission might extend. Water weighs 1 kilogram per liter. That's 17 pounds just in water before you add the containers. Food. What if the patrol runs long? What if you get cut off? What if helicopter resupply can't reach you? Carry extra MREs. More weight? Every addition makes sense individually. Every addition adds to the pile. And nobody wants to be the commander who sent soldiers out without something they needed. So everything gets added, nothing gets removed. The pile grows. The British took a different path. Not because they're smarter, because they had to. The British military operates with a fraction of American resources. They don't have the logistical capacity to supply every soldier with 300 rounds. of ammunition and 6 days of contingency supplies. They can't afford the lift capacity to move equipment that heavy. So they adapted. They developed doctrine around lighter loads. Trained soldiers to fight effectively with less. Built tactical approaches that don't require overwhelming ammunition supplies. Where Americans carry 300 rounds per rifleman, British soldiers carry 90. Where Americans carry contingency supplies for every possible scenario, British soldiers carry what they need for the mission and trust resupply to handle contingencies. This isn't cutting corners. It's a different philosophy. The British philosophy says mobility is protection. If you can move faster than the enemy, if you can maneuver while they're pinned, if you can close distance or break contact at will, you don't need as much armor. You don't need as many bullets. You don't need as many calories. Speed and endurance become your survival mechanism. The American philosophy says firepower and protection are protection. If you can suppress the enemy with overwhelming fire, if you can absorb hits that would kill unarmored soldiers, if you can sustain combat operations indefinitely without resupply, you don't need to be fast. You win through attrition and persistence. Neither philosophy is wrong in isolation. But in the summer heat of Helmand Province, one philosophy was about to break down completely. The patrol steps off at 0600. Early morning, the coup is part of the day? Relatively speaking, it's already 38 degrees. The Americans are sweating before they clear the wire. The plan is straightforward. Move to the village, 6 kilometers out. Clear it systematically. Engage with locals. Establish that coalition forces control the area. Return to base. Estimated duration, 6 hours. Actual duration will prove to be much longer. The first hour goes smoothly. The terrain is flat, irrigated, farmland, passed between fields. The British Marines are setting a steady pace. Not fast, sustainable. They're conserving energy for the heat of the day. The Americans are keeping up, but they're working harder. The extra weight means every step requires more effort. More energy burned, more heat generated, more water consumed. By the end of the first hour, the American soldiers have drunk nearly a liter of water each. The British have drunk half that. The American platoon sergeant notices and says nothing. At the 90-minute mark, the terrain changes. They leave the flat farmland and enter broken ground. Irrigation ditches, low walls, uneven surfaces. Every obstacle requires more energy to cross with a heavy load. The Americans start falling behind. Just slightly. A few meters at first. Then 10, then 20. The British patrol commander notices pissy. Slows the pace, but he doesn't stop. The Americans close the gap, then fall behind again. 2 hours in, the temperature has climbed to 43 degrees. The American soldiers are showing signs of heat stress. The face is flushed, breathing heavy, movements becoming less coordinated. One of the specialists stumbles crossing a ditch. His knee buckles under the weight of his pack. He recovers, keeps moving, but the platoon sergeant sees it. He knows what it means. His soldiers are burning through their reserves faster than planned. 3 hours in, the village is still 2 kilometers away. The mission isn't even half complete. An American private approaches the platoon sergeant. "Sergeant, I need to drop some weight." The platoon sergeant looks at him. The private is carrying an AT-4 rocket launcher in addition to his standard load. He's young, strong, one of the fittest soldiers in the platoon, and he's asking to abandon equipment. What do you want to drop? The AT-4? Or the extra ammunition? Can't keep carrying both. The platoon sergeant faces an impossible choice. The AT-4 is there in case they encounter a fortified position. The extra ammunition is there in case of extended contact. Both represent contingencies. Both represent what ifs. Both represent weight that might save lives if the worst happens. He looks at the British soldiers ahead. They're not carrying a T for South. They're not carrying extra ammunition. They're moving like the temperature is 20 degrees cooler and the terrain is flat. Drop the AT-4. Cache it. We'll recover it on the way back. The private drops the rocket launcher in an irrigation ditch. Marks the position. Keeps moving. 20 pounds lighter. Still carrying more than any British soldier. The village comes into view at the 4-hour mark. The temperature is 46 degrees. 3 American soldiers have consumed all their water. 2 more are rationing the last quarter liter. The British Marines still have water remaining. The platoon sergeant doesn't understand this. They've been covering the same ground, facing the same heat. How are the British not as depleted? The answer is physics. Basic thermodynamics. A soldier carrying 140 pounds generates more heat through exertion than a soldier carrying 75 pounds. Significantly more. That additional heat must be dissipated or it accumulates in the body. Raising core temperature, accelerating dehydration. Increasing the rate of water consumption needed to maintain thermoregulation. The British soldiers are drinking less because they need less. Their lower loads mean less exertion, Less exertion means less heat. Less heat means less sweating. Less sweating means less water required. The Americans are trapped in a vicious cycle. Carry more weight to be prepared for contingencies. Extra weight causes faster dehydration. Faster dehydration requires more water. More water adds more weight. More weight causes even faster dehydration. The math doesn't work. It was never going to work. The village clearing takes 2 hours. The Americans are professional. They execute their tasks despite the heat stress, but they're operating at reduced capacity. Reaction slower. Attention fragmented. The cognitive effects of heat exhaustion beginning to manifest. The British, notice, they don't say anything, but they adjust their positions. Covering angles. The Americans might miss compensating silently for their allies' degradation. At the 6-hour mark, the mission is complete. The village is cleared. No enemy contact. Hearts and minds, theoretically, 1. Time to return to base, 6 kilometers. The Americans look at the route back, and something shifts in their expressions. They've been moving for 6 hours. They've consumed most of their water. They're carrying packs that feel twice as heavy as they did this morning, and they have to cover the same ground they just crossed, but in the opposite direction. Into the afternoon heat. The British patrol commander checks his watch. Looks at the American platoon sergeant. Your men need a break. The platoon sergeant wants to refuse. His soldiers are Rangers, airborne, elite. They don't need breaks. They don't show weakness. They push through. But he looks at his soldiers. 2 of them are swaying. One is sitting down despite orders to remain standing. Another is staring at nothing. The first signs of heat casualties. 10 minutes. The platoon sergeant says. Hydration and rest. The British nod. They're not judging. They've seen this before. Heat breaks American soldiers in ways it doesn't break them. Not because Americans are weaker, because Americans are carrying loads designed for a different environment. For cooler temperatures. For shorter distances. For vehicle-based operations, where soldiers dismount, fight, and remount. The American equipment load makes sense if you're jumping out of a Humvee, fighting for 20 minutes, and jumping back in. It makes no sense if you're walking 12 kilometers across open desert in 50-degree heat. But the equipment load doesn't change based on the mission. It's standardized, required, non-negotiable. So soldiers break instead. The return journey is where the humiliation becomes undeniable. The temperature peaks at 52 degrees. 2 American soldiers go down with heat exhaustion. Not tiredness. Not fatigue. Genuine medical emergencies. Core temperatures exceeding safe limits. Confusion. Disorientation. Vomiting. The patrol halts. The British corpsmen provide treatment. Cold water. Shade created by boadies, blocking the sun. Attempts to lower core temperature before organ damage occurs. The platoon sergeant is on the radio calling for medical evacuation, but no helicopter can reach them for at least an hour. They're in a dead zone, too far from base for quick extraction. They will have to wait. Or move. The British patrol commander makes a decision. We split. My Marines will establish a security perimeter here and provide casualty care. Your soldiers who can still move, push for base, and get the medevac staged. The American platoon sergeant wants to argue. Wants to keep his unit together. Wants to handle this himself, but he has 2 soldiers who can't walk and 6 more who are marginally functional. The British Marines are offering to take the harder job. Stay in the heat. Guard the casualties. Wait for extraction while the afternoon sun tries to kill everyone. He has no choice. Do it. The mobile element moves out. 5 Americans who can still function. 8 British Marines. The British set the pace again. Slower now. Conscious of American limitations, but still moving steadily. The Americans are shambling. Every step an act of will. The weight on their backs has become crushing. Shoulders burning, hips aching, knees screaming with every impact. One of the American sergeants later described the experience in an after-action interview. I've done hard things. Ranger school, airborne, mountain warfare training, but I've never felt as broken as I did on that walk back. Not because I wasn't tough enough, because my equipment was trying to kill me. The British were right there. Same heat, same terrain, same threat environment. And they were functional, alert, covering sectors, making jokes. We could barely put one foot in front of the other. That's not a fitness problem. That's an equipment problem. They reach base 90 minutes later. The helicopter passes overhead going the other direction, extracting the heat casualties. Nobody died, but 2 soldiers will spend 3 days in the medical facility. 1 will be sent home for further evaluation. Career potentially affected, all because the standard load was too heavy for the conditions. The after-action review happens 2 days later. Joint session. British and American officers. The mood is tense. Nobody wants to say what everyone is thinking. The American company commander opens with statistics. 2. Heat casualties requiring medevac. 3. Additional soldiers, unrestricted duty. Mission accomplished, but at significant personnel costs. The British major responds carefully. He doesn't want to embarrass his allies, but he can't ignore what happened. Our Marines completed the same patrol with 0 casualties and significant remaining combat capacity. The difference wasn't fitness. It wasn't training. It was load. The American commander bristles. Our load requirements exist for reasons. Contingency planning, sustained combat capacity, force protection. Those requirements save lives. The British major nods. They save lives in some scenarios. In this scenario, they nearly cost lives. The room goes silent. This is the fundamental tension. American doctrine optimizes for worst-case scenarios. What if the patrol gets cut off? What if resupply fails? What if the firefight lasts for hours? Carry everything you might need because you might not get a chance to call for more. British doctrine optimizes for most likely scenarios. Most patrols don't get cut off. Most resupply works. Most firefights last minutes, not hours. Carry what you'll probably need and trust the system to handle exceptions. Neither is crazy, neither is irresponsible. They're different bets on different probabilities. The American bet means you're always prepared for catastrophe, but you pay for that preparation in reduced mobility and increased physiological stress. The British bet means you're lighter and faster, but vulnerable if the catastrophe actually happens. In the summer heat of Helmand, the American bet failed catastrophically. The weight meant to protect soldiers nearly killed them. The contingency supplies they carried went unused, while the supplies they needed most, water, ran out because they'd sweated through it twice as fast as their lighter counterparts. The British major says something that sticks with everyone in the room. Your doctrine isn't wrong. It's designed for a different war. Short duration, vehicle-based operations where soldiers fight from positions with resupply available. Afghanistan is in that war. Hasn't been that war for years? Long-foot patrols in extreme heat with unreliable helicopter support. Your equipment load is fighting the last war. Or maybe the next war. But not this war. The American commander doesn't have a response. Because the British major is right. Let me break down why this matters, beyond Afghanistan. Because the lessons from that patrol apply everywhere. Soldiers carry equipment. The human body has limits. Those limits don't change because the mission requires them to change. They don't change because doctrine says they should change. They don't change because equipment exists that soldiers could theoretically carry. The limits are biological, physics, chemistry, thermodynamics. A soldier under load generates heat proportional to the work being done. Heavier load equals more work equals more heat. That heat must be dissipated through sweating. Sweating requires water. Water has weight. The equation has no solution that allows unlimited load carrying in hot environments. At some point, the weight of water needed to sustain the activity exceeds the soldier's capacity to carry it. This is not a training problem. It is not a motivation problem. It is not a leadership problem. It is a math problem. The British solved the math by reducing the variables. Less load, less heat generated, less water needed, more capacity remaining for mission completion. The Americans refused to reduce the variables, so the math broke. Soldiers broke. The mission nearly broke. After Afghanistan, the Army conducted extensive studies on soldier load. Again, they'd done similar studies after World War II, after Korea, after Vietnam. After every conflict, every study reached the same conclusions. Soldiers are carrying too much. Loads are unsustainable. Mobility is being sacrificed for marginal increases in protection and firepower. Every study was ignored. Loads continued to increase. The pattern is institutional. Nobody wants to be responsible for a soldier dying because they lacked equipment. So equipment gets added, never removed. Even when studies show the equipment itself is causing casualties. Indirect casualties. Heat exhaustion, musculoskeletal injuries, reduced combat effectiveness leading to tactical failures. These casualties don't appear in the same reports as soldiers killed by enemy fire, so they don't get the same attention. A soldier killed because he didn't have a side plate as a headline. A soldier killed because he was moving too slowly to reach cover, weighed down by the side plate he was carrying, is a statistic buried in after-action data. The British weren't smarter, they were constrained. Limited resources, forced innovation. Limited logistics capacity, forced efficiency. Limited carrying capacity, forced prioritization. The Americans had unlimited resources and unlimited logistics, and unlimited carrying capacity, so they carried everything. And when carrying everything became impossible, they didn't reduce the load. They tried to develop technology to make carrying everything easier. Exoskeletons, autonomous vehicles, lighter materials. Billions of dollars spent to avoid the obvious conclusion that the British reached for free. Sometimes, less is more. The Joint Patrol became a case study. Not officially. Nobody wanted to formalize the lesson that British doctrine had humiliated American soldiers. But informally, in professional military education, in conversations between officers, in the quiet knowledge that what happened that day revealed something fundamental about how the two militaries think. The British approach isn't better. It's different. Optimized for different constraints. Built on different assumptions. Effective in different scenarios. A British patrol would have struggled if extended contact occurred. Their 90 rounds would have been insufficient for American suppressive fire tactics. Their lack of contingency supplies would have become critical if cut off overnight. The lighter load that saved them in the heat would have cost them in other circumstances. But on that day, in those conditions, the British approach proved superior. Not because it was universally better, because it matched the environment. The American approach didn't match. Soldiers suffered for it. Some were permanently affected. All learned something about the gap between doctrine and reality. The humiliation wasn't about weakness, wasn't about fitness, wasn't about toughness. It was about carrying equipment designed for one war into a different war and expecting the human body to make up the difference. Bodhies don't negotiate with doctrine. They obey physics. And physics said the American load was unsustainable. What can we learn from this? First, doctrine is not religion. It can be wrong. It can be outdated. It can be optimized for conditions that no longer exist. Questioning doctrine is not disloyalty. It's professionalism. Second, more is not always better. Every piece of equipment carries costs beyond its weight. Cognitive load, physical stress, reduced mobility. The benefit must exceed the total cost, not just the obvious cost. Third, constraints force innovation. The British developed their approach because they had no choice. Limited resources meant limited loads, which meant developing tactics that worked with limited loads. The Americans had resources, so they never developed that innovation. They could afford to carry more, so they did. Even when carrying more became counterproductive. Fourth, systems matter more than components. You can't take British load doctrine and apply it to American tactics. The British carry less because they fight differently. Their entire tactical system is designed around the constraints of what they can carry. Adopting British loads without adopting British tactics creates vulnerability. Similarly, you can't expect American loads to work in British-style extended foot patrols. The systems are different. The pieces don't interchange. Fifth, environment dictates requirements. What works in temperate climates fails in extreme heat. What works in vehicle-based operations fails in dismounted operations. What works for short-duration missions fails for extended patrols. Doctrine must be flexible enough to adapt, or soldiers pay the price. The soldiers who went down on that patrol didn't fail. Their doctrine failed them. Their equipment failed them. The institutional inability to adapt to reality failed them. They did everything right and still broke because the math was impossible from the start. That's not a soldier problem. That's a leadership problem. An institutional problem. A problem of doctrine becoming so rigid that it actively harms the people it's supposed to protect. The story of that joint patrol spread quietly through military circles. It became one of many examples cited when questioning American load requirements. It joined the statistics showing that musculoskeletal injuries from carrying heavy loads cost more medical resources than combat injuries in Afghanistan. It joined the studies showing cognitive degradation under heavy load. It joined the growing body of evidence that the American approach to soldier equipment had become counterproductive. Change came slowly, too slowly for the soldiers still carrying impossible loads. But it came. New equipment prioritizing weight reduction. New doctrine allowing commanders to adjust loads based on mission requirements. New recognition that the one-size-fits-all approach to equipment didn't fit any situation optimally. The British watched this evolution with a mix of satisfaction and concern. Satisfaction that their approach was being validated. Concern that their approach worked because it was British. Designed for British operations with British logistics and British tactical doctrine. American adoption of British load principles without American adaptation of British tactics could create new problems. Different problems, but still problems. The truth is, neither military has the perfect answer. The British carry too little for some scenarios. The Americans carry too much for some scenarios. The perfect load doesn't exist, because the perfect scenario doesn't exist. What exists is judgment, adaptation, the ability to look at a specific mission in a specific environment and make intelligent decisions about what to bring and what to leave. That judgment was missing on the day of the joint patrol. Standard loads were carried, despite conditions that made standard loads impossible. Soldiers suffered because nobody was willing to say that today. In this heat, with this mission, we need to do things differently? That's the real humiliation. Not that Americans couldn't keep up with British Marines, but that everyone knew the loads were wrong and nobody changed them. That soldiers broke following procedures that were obviously unsuited to the situation. That doctrine trumped common sense. If you want to understand how militaries actually work, how doctrine develops and sometimes fails, how soldiers adapt and sometimes can't, subscribe now. The next video breaks down what happened when American Special Operations tried to adopt British SAS selection standards and discovered that some things don't translate across the Atlantic. The lessons parallel everything we've discussed today. Different approaches for different contexts. Failure when context is ignored. Humility when reality proves doctrine wrong. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.